are a great place to really get some work done, because not only can you get some work done, but there's also inspiration really all around you. If you work remotely, that means you are now able to work really from anywhere. But where is the best place to work? In this video, I'm going to show you 16 different places to work remotely. Hey, I'm Najeeb. I'm an author, founder, and entrepreneur. Now, I've been working remotely for 8 years. And what that means is, before we go into the list, I'm going to show you 4 things to be aware of when you work remotely. The first thing to think about when you work remotely is having a quiet place. The place and the noise makes a huge difference, because sometimes when you're working, you get interrupted by others or you hear background noise that becomes distracting for when you are deep dive and into working. The second thing to be aware of is the internet. Now, internet actually breaks down to 2 different elements. One is the speed and the other is the stability of it. Now, depending on where you are, you might have fast internet access, but you might not have stability or stable internet, or it'll really go in and out. So you want to be aware of, 1, does it have the fast internet, and 2, does it have stability and does it not drop off? Because those 2 things is going to matter a lot if you are going to be spending time online, which majority of the people are. However, if you are just going to be focused doing your work, you don't really need to connect to internet. Perhaps you're typing out a document or doing some Excel documents, spreadsheets. In that case, you might not need to worry about it. However, that is an important, crucial element when you're looking at the internet, the speed, and the stability of it. 4th element is thinking about price. Now, price obviously varies huge spectrum, because you have anything for free to several $100s a month. But now what you want to be aware of is, what is the price based on your budget and how much you are willing to spend for it. At the end of the video, I'm going to give you a bit of warning to help you decide which place to pick out of all of these spaces based on your circumstance. So stay tuned to the end of the video, and that'll help you decide out of all these 16 places which is the best for you. So let's dive right into it. Number 1 is your home. Your home, or where you are living, your apartment, your house, condo, wherever you're staying, that is perhaps one of the best free places to work. If you're paying for a space to live, you already have that space for some time, so living and working out of that same space is going to be virtually free for you. However, a few things you want to be aware of is really, do you have access to the essentials, which is, as we mentioned before, the internet. Do you have fast internet, and do you have a quiet place to work from? Now, that's going to be dependent on, of course, where you live and how the environment and the neighborhood is. So for example, if you are perhaps near the ground floor in a noisy neighborhood, then it can be somewhat distracting, as you can hear sirens coming in from outside. Number 2 is libraries. Now, when it comes to libraries, there is really a wide spectrum of libraries, and it's really spread out across cities. So that's the one advantage, that you have easy access to it. However, depending on places that it is in or places that you are in, there might be some costs. So some libraries, often libraries are free. However, some libraries might charge $5 for you to have access to the facilities. That is dependent on city to city. However, for a majority of libraries, it tends to be free, and if you want to make use of it, what that means is you can use the tables, you can use the internet. However, one thing to be aware of is it becomes a quiet place, which is great. However, if you need to make any sort of video conferencing or teleconferencing calls, you might be asked to leave or quiet down, so it might not be the best place for doing that. However, the one great thing about libraries is not only, as I mentioned before, that it has internet, but it also has printing facilities, which might be helpful if you need it. The third is malls. Now, when it comes to malls, it's really in large cities. However, the one advantage is, when it comes to malls, although it's quite commonplace, it is easy to get access to. That means finding parking is typically going to be easy for the most part. Now, the one thing to be aware of when it is malls, it's going to be really noisy. And what that means is, if you can plug in your headphones and get to work, that might be okay for you. But however, if you need a quiet place, it's probably not the best place for yourself. However, It is easy access to get to if you're driving, or typically malls are located in a place where there is public transportation and there is typically Wi-Fi. However, the one thing you want to be aware of is there enough access to sit, and is there enough place without having distraction? Because if it's a mall and perhaps a food court, there might be a lot of distraction with people with food. Fourth is bookshops. Now, when it comes to bookshops, the one advantage is you know that everyone is really there with a shared interest, which is growth. And part of what that means is they're trying to learn, they're trying to focus, and if they're trying to read, doing all of that, you are perhaps in the right place. However, similar to the libraries that I mentioned previously, what you want to be aware of is, can you use the place? And two, can you do your work there for free? Because for some bookstores, they might charge, or others might ask you to keep your voice down based on where and what you are going to be doing. By the way, before I continue with the rest of the list, if you want to join a private community of remote leaders and founders, head on over to council.club. Now, on to the rest of the list. Number 5 is parks. Now, parks really matter on a wide spectrum as well, because for the most part, it is, just like libraries, free. However, some places might not be able to be used at certain times of the year, depending on where you live and really what city you're in. So for example, if you are in a city where there is a lot of weather seasonality differences, so that means if it's snowing or if it rains a lot, you're probably not going to be, or probably not preferring to work in the rain or the snow. However, for tropical climate, or if it's just summertime in those cities, you can more than welcome to use the parks. And what that means is, typically if it means laying out on the grass or working on a table or even the bench, you can find a great place to work. However, the one caveat is, typically, not a lot of parks have Wi-Fi, some do, but when it comes to the Wi-Fi, you want to be aware of is, one, can you access it in the first place? Now, the other benefit of using the park is you get the sunshine, you get the elements, you get the weather, and it feels great to be outside. However, accessing the facilities, whether it means using the washroom or even something like the printer if you need it, might not be nearby, obviously, especially when it comes to printer. However, when it comes to washroom, you want to be aware of, can you use the washroom and come back to the same place? Because if it's a busy park, typically you're not able to. So those are the few things to keep in mind when it comes to using a park. Next up is hotel lobbies. Now, with hotel lobbies, it really doesn't matter if you're staying in a hotel or if you're not. Because what ends up happening is, with hotel lobbies, unlike other places, it is a quiet place. It is a place that's typically well designed, obviously depends on the hotel, and usually has fast internet access. Now, the thing is, for you to get access to it, there are two different ways. One is, again, as I mentioned, if you are a paying guest, you will have access to Wi-Fi for the most part. If you're not, then depending on the hotel, you might be able to get access to the Wi-Fi or not. Now, if you are not a guest, one tip is to simply go ask the reception for the hotel Wi-Fi. And what that allows you to do is sit in the lobby, have a quiet, clean place, and sometimes there might be snacks or perhaps even just water for you to sip on in a hotel lobby. Heritage sites. Heritage sites are places where it has some significance in value. So if it's something like a botanical garden, a castle, a theater, or a landmark, these are different heritage sites and obviously varies across cities. Now, one advantage is when you're working in a heritage site, it is typically fantastic, novel, and a great scenery because you're able to work beside or in someplace new. However, one thing to be aware of is when it comes to using a heritage site, more often than not, it typically tends to be paid. Some might be free, and based on that, you want to be aware of it. At the same time, because it is a heritage site, if it's typically paid, there is typically free Wi-Fi. And if there is free Wi-Fi, there is a benefit of working there. Now, when it comes to using the heritage site, what you want to be aware of is, does it have access to the facilities? Again, using the washroom, because like park and libraries that I mentioned previously, if it tends to be very busy, then you might not be able to go back to the same spot as you were from before. Campus. College and university campuses are a great place to work out from, especially if you are a student. Now, if you're not a student, some places have access to Wi-Fi, some don't. However, if you are a student or if you have access to an alumni network, what that means is you get access to the Wi-Fi, and that is a great place because everyone's there focusing on their work, and it's a place if you need to make a conference call or even a video call, you might be able to do that. If you're in a city and you're not a student, a few options is really asking another student for their Wi-Fi info, if that is appropriate. And two is perhaps asking the reception or the admin people who are at the college and universities to say, hey, I'm just here, I'm a visitor, could I try using the Wi-Fi? Now, you might not get a positive response, or you might, it really depends based on colleges, but that is a great place for you to work. Next is food. Now, food actually breaks down into three different elements. Now, first thing we're going to talk about is cafes. Now, quiet cafes, it goes without saying, is one of the most common places to work, largely because people usually think about going to some place like Starbucks or their local coffee shop, because that is a place where you can really sit down, hunker down, and really get to work. And you see a lot of other people doing it. And it's a frequent place where people can just come in and go. And what that means is, for you, it's typically a place that is nearby and you have access to. Now, that is a quiet cafe that you can work out from. The next category in food is fast food restaurants. Now, when it comes to fast food restaurants, something like McDonald's or Harvey's or Subway, what ends up happening is typically there is Wi-Fi and you can kind of depend on it in different parts of the country and the cities. However, what that means is because it is a fast food place, the Wi-Fi might not be great. The one thing is, if you are in a foreign place, if you really need access to Wi-Fi, again, like I mentioned, with cafes being one, such as Starbucks, the other place is fast food restaurants like McDonald's. Because getting access to Wi-Fi in fast food restaurants makes it a common place, so you can easily locate it, and two, you have access to the internet. The one downside of using a fast food restaurant, as you can imagine, it's going to be quite noisy and it could be dirty depending on which type of fast food location it is. We spoke about cafes, we spoke about fast food restaurants, and now the next step is really just restaurants itself. Now, these restaurants could be something like bars and pubs, or it could be fancy fine dining restaurants. Now, typically when it comes to fine dining restaurants, during the peak time, they are probably going to look down on you if you're just really getting to work. However, if it's not a peak time, that could be a great time and place to work, because really they want it to look busy, but they don't want to just have anyone be in that space. That is fine dining. Now, if it comes to bars and pubs, it could be a place where you just get some quality downtime of work. And if you just want to relax and watch a sports game, you could do that in the background as well. Now, when it comes to food places to work out from, we mentioned cafes, we mentioned fast food restaurants, and just restaurants in general. Now, when it comes to those three areas, you want to be aware of the price, because obviously it's going to range from places where you can walk in without buying anything and other places where you're going to have to spend to stay there. If you're going to spend money to use that place, one thing you can do is just order a drink or some small appetizer that helps you stay in the space. However, the one benefit is because you're already in a food establishment, you can really have your lunch or your breakfast right there as you're working. Co-working spaces. Co-working spaces are places, offices where people come together and they just use that facility or desk for a short period of time. Now, typically, if you think about having an office is really a place in a building where you rent it out for perhaps a year. Now, when it comes to co-working spaces, you can drop in for a day, you can use that space for a month or longer periods of time, and typically it happens a one-time fee or a membership model where you pay every month, just like a gym membership. Now, when it comes to co-working spaces, obviously it varies quite a bit, and it's dependent on city to city. I'm going to be creating a separate video on how to choose the best co-working spaces for you, but in the meantime, what you want to be aware of is, one, do you have access to it? Can you get there easily? Two, is it the right price for you? Because obviously it varies. And three is, how often are you going to be using the facilities? Because more often than not, what ends up happening is there's a desk and there are other perks that typically go with the co-working space, such as they might have beer on tap, they might have other tea, coffee, they might even have lunch or snacks. those are a few things you want to be aware of when it comes to co-working spaces. Other homes. Other people's homes are a place where you can work. Now, if you have friends or if you have friends of friends, that is a great place for you to work with others. It also means it is really a fresh change in scenery because not only are you in your own home, you're really getting somewhere else and going and working with them, or perhaps by yourself where you're perhaps house sitting. Now, when it comes to other people's homes, it's gonna really range from free or perhaps even paid. Gyms. Gym and sports clubs might allow you to work from there. Most gyms have Wi-Fi. Now, if it's a lower priced gym, they might not. However, higher priced gyms typically have Wi-Fi, and if they have a place where you can sit and work from, perhaps a table or a chair or even a couch, that is a great place for you to just really get some focus and get some work done. Now, because it is a gym, you're typically going to hear some background noise from people. So people typically working out, or background noise from the music that's being played in the gym. And what that means is if that's something that you're comfortable with, perhaps having headphones, that is something that might work out for you. However, if you are not a gym member, as I alluded to before, that might be a caveat for you to work over there in the first place. Now, a lot of gyms have free day passes or perhaps 7-day trial. If you use that, you can perhaps work at the gym and really get some work done. Museums. Now, museums and galleries are a great place to really get some work done because not only can you get some work done, but there's also inspiration really all around you. What that also means is depending on the city and the museum that you're using, it might be paid. There are a few free places to work. However, one thing you want to be aware of is if it's a free place, it might be super crowded. And if that's the case, that might not be a place where you do want to work. If there is a paid museum or gallery, that is not only going to be looking much better, but the Wi-Fi is going to be typically better, and it's going to be a safer place for you to really get some work done and enjoy the place after. Private clubs. Last but not least are private clubs. Now, private clubs are exclusive clubs where you can really go and get some work done. It's typically membership or application based, and for you to have access to using their facilities, you have to go through quite a bit of application, and it's going to take some length of time. But if you are part of one private club, sometimes what that means is you have access to other clubs if they have different locations. And typically the membership fees range in the multiple thousands, and of course that depends on the club itself. Now, these are the 16 places where you can work remotely. As I mentioned, a few words of warning. Number one is the essentials. As I mentioned previously, having not only a quiet place to work but also internet, the speed of it and the stability of it is hugely important for you to get your work done. At the same time, what you want to be aware of is power outlets, really. Because if you're going to be working on your laptop, you might run out of power after 2 hours. So that might force you to get some work done within 2 hours. However, if you need to stay longer, if you're at a park, you might not have access to an outlet, and that's something you want to think about beforehand. Next is security. Security is important when you're working remotely. Frankly, because you have passwords, you have client information, and you don't want it all to get lost or stolen. And in that case, if you are working using public Wi-Fi in a public place, it can get easily hacked. So you want to make sure you use something like a VPN so you don't get hacked, or at least reduces your chances of it. At the same time, the public Wi-Fi has a higher risk. So if you're using your Wi-Fi at a place that is more secure, such as a private members club or a co-working space or your own home, which is a bit better off than a public Wi-Fi. The other consideration you want to think about is how is it going to look from a client side. If you have a lot of meetings to take care of and do perhaps in person or perhaps virtually, if you have that in the background. So if it's in a park, how is that going to look for your client? They might be happy with it or they might not. Or if you're working at home and there's really a bed behind you and it is a very serious and professional meeting, it might not have the right vibe. So that's something you want to think about. If you regularly meet clients in person, then someplace like a co-working space or a members club might be better off than meeting them at a library. Last but not least is the outlook of the space providers. Now, if it's a park, if it's a heritage site, if it's a gallery, if you stay there for a long period of time, people are typically not going to mind. However, if it's a cafe, if it's a restaurant, especially a small mom and pop shop, if you're just there for 8 hours a day every single day and all you do is buy one coffee, then it's not going to look good for you. Unless, of course, you've built some rapport with them, gotten to know them, and they might feel comfortable with it. You also want to be aware of, are you able to help create a win-win scenario for the people who work there? In the 8 years I've been working remotely, these are the 16 places to work and the considerations to keep in mind. The one key thing is it's going to vary for everyone. Some people enjoy co-working spaces, others enjoy working out of their home, others work in the cafe. It's all going to depend on the price, your comfort level, the speed of the internet, the noise, and the other considerations that I mentioned. So what do you think? Did I miss any co-working spaces or spaces to work out from? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to stay tuned for more remote work and leadership content, hit the subscribe button. If you want to join a private community of remote leaders and founders, head on over to council.club.